Hello everyone. I hope we are live. So thanks everyone who has joined already and who will watch this video in future. I am Jigar Dulla. I am the organizer of Laravel Pune Meetups community. This time we are doing a online session, and this time I have Abhishek here with me from Chennai. So he was very proactive in saying yes to this session. Thanks a lot, Abhishek. And yes, we are looking forward to learning service containers from you. Yeah,
Cool.
over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you. Do you want to set the screen for me? All right. So I hope you guys are able to see the screen. Uh, hi, my name is Abhishek, and today I'm planning on giving the presentation on Laravel service containers. Uh, I understand, this is a little tricky subject for most new developers, and they usually skip this part and just get on to understanding what are controllers, models, and how to use them, than understanding what Laravel service containers. So I'm trying to keep the language very simple, so that new developers or developers that don't understand this can actually understand how Laravel service containers work and what's inside it, and why it's not a complicated subject. So about me, I have about 19 years of experience, and I started working with .NET, then I moved on to Java, then I moved on to PHP, and ever since I started using Laravel, I've not gone back to any other language, and I've been using Laravel since 2013. Right now, I do develop backend integrations for Shopify merchants. And when I say backend integrations, it's basically integrating Shopify with other different applications that the vendors use to fulfill their store process, basically integrating multiple applications. And so, why are we going to learn? Why do we need to learn about service containers? It's I've tried to keep a lot of content in this. That way, people who are going to read this, go through this presentation again, they find it quite easy, and I try to keep it also in very simple language. So when it comes to service containers, the first thing that you understand is what is dependency management, and how dependency management works with in Laravel, and how you can make your code more modular, and more how you can make it testable. uh, how to write good code and keep it maintainable, that is one of the most important things that you learn when you learn about service containers. Then comes the part of flexibility, where you understand how you bind interfaces, or how you create aliases, or how to switch dependencies. And you basically get more control over how you create your code when you're writing a service provider. How you actually where exactly you initialize your the service containers. So basically, that then comes then you learn a few advanced techniques as to what are the different types of bindings that are available. There are times you just need a singleton injection. Sorry, a singleton binding, or sometimes you might need a contextual binding. So there are different kinds of bindings that we are going to look at, and how each one is useful. And I'm also going to give you an example of a simple example of how a fruit basket is uh, can make more sense in understanding service containers. And then having a core, understanding service containers will give you more understanding on how Laravel internal actually works, and how Laravel also uses service containers by itself, with different packages that it has, and additionally you will also understand how you can build robust applications. Then it also helps you do a lot of problem solving when you come across an issue, and you don't you let's say there is an issue that is happening within a Laravel internal, or you use a third party package in which you come across an issue, or you come across a bug, or you get an error and you don't understand where you're going wrong. Understanding service containers will give you some amount of understand clarity on where exactly the issue might be when it comes to third party packages or Laravel internals. um, so what we are going to learn today, it's a dry subject. It's more of a theory subject. So a little bit of patience is required from you guys. So I know, but I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. We were To start with, we are going to take a look at a simple example to understand how service containers internally work. And I'll give you a simple example. We'll compare how the example compares with Laravel's authentication system. Then we will then go into service containers. What is service container? Then I'm going to give you most of this session is going to talk about a fruit basket analogy and explaining what service containers are and how you're going to how different bindings work. So that is something that we are going to see. And then finally we're going to circle back after we finish all the bindings, based on what we understand, how Laravel again uses its authentication package for us to be able to use it wherever we need. So let's take a quick simple example. Let's say you're going to a coffee shop. Okay, so there are different and you want to place an order. Let's say you place an order for a latte. There are different components that are involved in placing an order for a latte, and there is a process involved in placing when you place an order to when you get your latte in your hand. So the components are basically that you see is, you are the customer. You see a cashier. There is a barista who makes the coffee. There is a coffee machine that is involved, and there are ingredients that are involved. So when you look at the whole process of you placing an order and the whole until you get the coffee or a latte, so a customer orders a latte. The order is processed at the register. Cashier checks for the inventory. Cashier requests the barista to make your latte. The barista uses the coffee machine. Barista uses the ingredients that are needed for the coffee machine, and then a latte is served to you. I hope that makes a bit of sense of all the components and the process involved. Now let's see how a similar kind of where we can do a comparison of how Laravel, how we actually do it in Laravel, and how internally it works within Laravel. So when you want to authenticate a user, what you basically do is have let's keep this simple, because I'm not going to go into how Laravel Jetstream uses or how Laravel Fortify uses, but a simple new developer, if you're writing code, you would start with a controller. So in the controller, you're going to have a method called login, and then the controller receives a request. Then you instantiate the auth service provider, or the let's say the authentication manager that Laravel provides you, and then you use that instance and then call the attempt method, passing the credentials from the request. So on line 10 is where you see you are instantiating the authentication object, and then in line 12 is where you see you're authenticating, you're calling the attempt method, passing the credentials from the request, validating it, and then checking whether the authentication is valid or invalid. Now, how it internally works within Laravel is what you have is the authentication service provider, which is initialized by default and on your service provider. And so if you take a look at it, on line 37 is where you do a singleton object gets created with an alias of auth, and when you and which returns a new authentication manager instance. So there are a couple of things that are involved here. There is the singleton method, then there is an alias, and then there is an authentication manager. We have no idea what is inside each of this, but no matter what is inside it, if we understand what uh, binding is and how uh, Laravel is able to retrieve this instance, that will make more sense. That way, when you're developing new applications, you would be able to clean do coding as clean as how Laravel provides you. So let's see what a service container. So Laravel explain. I mean, as per Laravel docs, service container is a powerful tool for managing class dependencies and performing dependency injection. It allows you to bind interfaces to implementations, promoting loose coupling and easier testing. First time when you read this is going to sound like Greek to you. If you're a new developer, you might not understand what dependency injection is, or you might not understand binding interfaces or loose coupling, or if you're not into testing, you might not even understand that. So let's take a simple example. Say, consider your container as a basket of fruits. When I say container, I mean the service container. So uh, let's consider that as a basket full of fruits. Now, if you want an apple, you check if the basket has apples and you pick it. You either eat it or you do what you want with the apple. But if the apple isn't there in the bowl, then you need to add the apples before you can take it. Does it make sense? So in translation, when you want to compare service container with a basket full of fruits, the bowl is the container. Now, finding the apple from the basket is the service, and the apple is the binding inside the service container. So when I say apple, the apple as a fruit is the binding inside the service container. And using the apple to your needs is basically the methods and properties inside your binding. So basically, when you have an apple instance, the properties, methods, those are what are inside your apple class. And I think this makes a little bit of sense. Now let's see how service containers work internally. Now, from a technical angle, if you see, the service container maintains a registry of bindings. When I say registry, it's again a basket of bindings which map to interfaces or abstract classes to concrete implementations. It resolves dependencies by automatically instantiating the necessary classes and injecting them wherever needed. Again, might sound technical, might sound Greek to some people, but let's try to take the non-technical angle. Non-technically, if you take a look at it, the basket contains a number of fruits which are mapped to a name given to them. But so let's say if you're taking an apple can be a green apple, an apple can be a Fuji, an apple can be a Washington. There are different types of apples that are available. So when you have apple as an instance, then you need to know what kind of an apple you need. So so basically naming that is what is being taken care of. So to pick an apple from a basket that has many different types of apples, you know, and among other fruits that are also there, you basically need to uh, say you want to pick a green apple, okay? And when so what you let's so if you want, so you pick a green apple. Now you can with that instance you can do or when I say instance, with that fruit you can basically do whatever you want. You can create a fruit salad, you can create a juice. However you want to use it, you can basically use it. So fruits is basically considered as, I mean, from a non-technical angle, for you to understand, fruits are the registry of bindings. Apple is basically the interface or an abstract class that can be associated with concrete implementation. So if you have a class called green apple, which implements, let's say, a base class called apple, then you basically set up bindings on your for your service container to say that, when I request an apple, if I want a green apple, then you basically configure your service container that way. And resolving dependency is where you're requesting a green apple. Okay, this is basically something that I explained. But what happens is when you resolve dependencies, if you're additionally, if your class that you're instantiating also has cascading dependencies, then those also get uh, initialized automatically when it comes to the Laravel's dependency injection. Now, to understand, how you work with service containers, it's very important that you understand how bindings work. Uh, when we looked at the auth service provider in a few slides back, we noticed that there is the singleton method that was used on the service provider. Uh, so we basically don't know what it is or why it is being used. It's returning an instance of the auth manager using an alias. So there is not a lot of, unless and otherwise you've gone through the docs completely and you've understood each and every sentence of the documentation, great. But if you have not, if you have skipped it, if you have just gone ahead with the rest of the documentation, and let's take a look at how each of what are the different types of bindings available, and what how each binding is useful and when to use what binding. So Laravel provides a lot of different types of bindings. I think I missed one of the binding methods here, but I'm going to explain that. Uh, it So basically, the type of binding that you use depends on what how you want to use it, or how your instance that you're going to use uh, is going to be used in your code, or if are you going to use an interface? Are you going to use an interface that returns a concrete class, or is it going to be an interface that you use and then you're going to retrieve multiple different instance of classes? That's something that depends on how you need the code to work, or how you want a particular instance need to be returned. So meaning, what if I want to take a fruit from the basket, I need to know whether I'm going to use it to eat it, or I'm going to use it to make a juice or a fruit salad or a smoothie. It depends on how you want to use it. So let's take a look at types of bindings here. We have the basic binding, we have the singleton binding, we have scopes singleton binding, then we have the contextual binding, we have the primitive binding, then the one that I missed is the variadic binding, then there's the interface binding. Then let's look at how we can tag bindings, uh, and that's a very interesting scenario that can be used. I'll explain how that works. Then we'll also look at one other section called the how we extend the bindings. So when it comes to basic binding, it's pretty simple. You basically use the bind method on your app instance, and then you return an instance. Uh, so so what basically happens here is, when you so if you look at the code here, let me, before explain what basic binding does. So every time you initialize the interface or the abstract class that you are setting up for basic binding, a new instance is always created. So for example, let's take a look at the fruit class that we have that we are binding to the service container, and which returns an instance, a new instance of apple. So every time you create, you resolve, or create an instance of the fruit class, a new instance is returned to you. So if you do a second time, a new instance. So that's how you that's how the basic binding works. In other words, let's if we want to take so So that's what I've explained here at the bottom. Each time you call the app of fruit class, a new instance of an apple is created and returned. Well, when it comes to singleton binding is used when you want to create, uh, you know, when you want to resolve the fruit object, or when you want to resolve the uh, abstract class or your interface, and the instance is resolved only once during your whole and only once. Uh, so once a singleton binding is resolved, the same object instance will be returned on every subsequent calls from the container. So if if you add an apple to the basket, no matter how many times you request an apple, or you pick an apple from the basket, it's always going to be the same something so that's how singleton binding works. It's usually helpful. uh, an example that you saw in a previous slide is how the auth manager is being initialized as a singleton on the auth service provider, which that Laravel internally does. uh, Next comes the scoped singleton binding. A scoped singleton binding is when you want, it's very similar to singleton binding, but the only difference is if it the resolve that happens is usually per Laravel request lifecycle, or a job lifecycle. So if I make a single request once, and if the request has an instantiation of a scoped singleton binding, then I receive one instance. Anytime within that request, if I try to make repeat the instantiation of that same binding, then I'm going to get the same request. But the second request, if I'm sending, then it's going to be a new instance. Does it make sense? So if you, an example that I've given here is, if you pick up fruit from a basket in your house, let's say your house is the scope, then I'm going to get one apple. But if I go and pick an apple from another house, then it's going to be a different. I mean, it's just a simple example that I've tried to give, but just for you to make sense on what scoped is. So your house is basically, your house is a scope, your another house is a scope. So each time you pick an apple, it's going to be uh, two different apples. Usually scoped singleton is useful when you're working with multi-tenant applications, where you want to maintain consistency and have user specific state throughout the life cycle. Or when I say user specific, it doesn't need to be user specific. It could be tenant specific throughout the life cycle. So those are cases where scoped singleton binding is very useful. Then comes the contextual binding. So contextual binding is something where based on what data that you're passing into your binding. So sometimes you have two classes that utilize the same interface. Let's say in this example, if you see, you have two instances called, two interfaces called fruit salad and smoothie. And based on what value you give to it, you get data. Uh, uh, you know, you get a different data. So, for example, uh, the fruit salad, where fruit salad is an interface which sorry, a fruit salad. Sorry, um, fruit is the interface. Fruit salad is the class. And when you're instantiating the fruit salad, and uh, you want to get an apple back, that's what happens here. So again, when you are initializing smoothie, and if you want to, so that will give you banana as the fruit type. So so take a look at this example, where from 14 to 18, when I'm creating an instance of fruit salad and I want to get the fruit type, I get apple. But if I try to instantiate the class smoothie, then when I get the fruit type, it returns banana. So that's contextual binding. This is pretty much useful, for, let's say, a payment gateway service that you're trying to build, integration with a payment gateway service. Let's say you want all your payments to happen through PayPal, but when it comes to subscriptions, you want the payment to happen through, uh, let's say, Stripe. In cases like this, if you have a base class called payment gateway, which has a method called charge, and so when you're doing a payment gateway, sorry, when you're performing, let's say you have an order controller, and you want to process payments, then the order controller, when it is the order controller, then you would get a PayPal instance back. But if it's the subscription controller, then it would be the uh, Stripe that you want to use to process your subscriptions. Uh, Hope that makes sense. And okay, next is the primitive binding. Primitive binding is pretty similar to the contextual binding, but is useful when you want to return an integer or a string based on a configuration. It could be configuration. It could be simple as what you pass to a constructor of an instance. So if you look at the example here, I have a class called the apple pie, and the constructor needs an apple type, and when you so when you whatever you pass as the value to the constructor is what is given as the is returned. This is a very simple example to make you understand, but let's take a simple example. Let's take another example where you are trying to create uh, you're trying to send an email, and you have a constructor where your first parameter is the from, your second parameter is the to. I mean, it's going to be pretty simple as this, but yeah. So what you can basically uh, indicate when you're binding the container as to what a parameter of your constructor gets bound to which variable. So basically that's how primitive binding does, to my understanding. And I'm so that's so here, as a simple example, you need a specific type of apple, and like a Granny Smith, you specify this type when you add it to the basket. Next comes the interface binding. Interface binding is one of the powerful features that Laravel provides you as part of your service container, and it's something that Laravel also uses a lot internally. So it's basically you have an interface which is being used by a concrete class, and every time, so what service container does is when you bind the interface to the service containers, every time you instantiate the interface, it returns the concrete class. So if you look at the example here, we have an interface called the fruit, and we have a concrete class called the apple. So every time you instantiate the fruit class, you're going to get an instance of the apple class. Makes sense? So that's interface binding. Next comes the typed variant binding. This is a very useful, an interesting, and a very useful way to usage. I'll explain to you where this can be used as well. So when it comes to typed variadic binding in Laravel, it allows you to resolve multiple dependencies at the same time. Okay, instead of binding each individual dependency, you can bind a group of them and request them all at once, making it's like asking your for creating an instance of a fruit basket and getting multiple fruits back. So if you look at it here, what happens here is I have the fruit interface, and every time I instantiate the fruit basket, I want an array of these services back. So, so imagine you have a basket full of various fruits. You regularly ask your basket to give you a specific number of fruits of specific different types, for example, apples, oranges, and bananas. However, sometimes you want the basket to give you a combination of fruits, and the exact type of quantities may vary based on your needs. So, if you take a look at this, I'm using the same fruit interface. When I instantiate it, uh, I will now have an array of objects, uh, array of fruit objects that I want to call. So fruit interface has a method called uh, uh, add salad, which is implemented within each concrete fruit classes that we saw in the previous uh, each of these service classes. So when you do this, you will be able to, it automatically calls the uh, so the make salad method automatically adds the fruits from each of whatever, however you have it configured on your concrete class. It gets added automatically, and the make salad creates the uh, gives you a salad. So that's typed variadic binding. So to, when it comes to, let's say, a real life example, let's say you have um, notification service where you have uh, let's say you have Slack notifications, you have mail notifications, you have text notifications. So say you have an interface called notification service, where every time you instantiate the notification service, you want an array of all these three methods. Sorry, all the three instances of the Slack interface, your mail notification mail service, and the text service. You can basically use the variadic binding and get an instance of all these three, and then send a message to all using all the three services together. Makes sense? All right, let's then look at tagging bindings. Tagging bindings is a very interesting thing. Not sure if a lot of people use it, but what it basically does is you can tag two different bindings and then put them into one. And then every time you create an instance of the tag, you get an array of both the bindings. It's quite similar to how variadic works, but in this case, you're tagging it. You're not creating uh, an instance of a variadic interface, uh, a variadic binding. So if you take a look at this, you have a binding called banana, which returns an instance of banana. If you There is another binding that we have, which is called mango, which returns an instance of mango. So now I create a tag using both these instances and call them tropical. So let's say I want to retrieve a list of tropical fruits. So I would just create app, uh, get it using the app object. I would get the tag called tropical. So this basically returns an instance of both banana and mango as an array. Makes sense? It's useful in a lot of scenarios when you know how exactly you want to use it. And then comes the next. Let's see how extending bindings are useful, or when you want to do when you would want to extend a binding. So extend is the method that you would use for extending your bindings, wherein you first on the first parameter pass the binding that you want to extend, and then the second you basically pass the service, basically the concrete class, or sorry, the interface or the concrete class, how whatever object that you're binding, that would be used, that would be the parameter to your callback, and you can call the methods that you want within it. So for example, in here I have a instance of the apple. I have extended it to add a sticker to the to each of the apples when I eat a sticker called fresh, to each of these apples. So every time now I create an instance of the fruit, the sticker method, add sticker method gets called, and the sticker is automatically added to the fruits. Make sense? All right. So we've seen how bindings work. We've seen how what are the different types of bindings and when they are useful. Now let's take a look at how we can resolve bindings. So resolving bindings can be done in four different ways. Now the first one is using the make method of the app instance. So every time you call app method, it returns you the app application object, and then you call the uh, make method, and then you pass the either the alias or the interface that you've used to create the binding in your service container. The second way is to call the resolve. The resolve is basically an alias to the make method. So the parameter is the same. You pass the either the interface or the alias that you want to use. Then you also have the app method itself that you can use, which is the application object. The app when you pass the parameter to the app instance app method, it basically what it does is it calls the make method internally within the application object. The fourth way is to use dependency injection or automatic injection, which when passed, when used as a parameter on your constructor or your methods, automatically gets instantiated to use within your method or your constructor or within your class. So that's how resolving the bindings work. Now, circling back to the Laravel authentication,
Can
if
I
you
can I interrupt you?
sure,
So can you go back?
yep.
Yes. So is there any difference between these, or it's everything, every option results in the same result?
Uh,
Like,
there are minor, differences. If you want to, uh, what kind of differences are you asking about?
so let's say if I do app make, then
Uh-huh.
it will also give me fruit surface or the fruit class result, whatever the
Yeah,
binding was, and
yeah,
same result will be the same for resolve
yeah.
also.
Correct.
Okay, so there are just four ways
Yeah, these
is
are the
what you,
four ways. It depends. I
uh,
mean, each of the ways, it's pretty much the same. There are cases where sometimes you use it when you're writing tests. You do it differently. When you create mocks or when you create factories, you use it differently. But pretty much all the four does the same thing.
hmm, because most of the most of them are helper functions and they will be available across the app. So that I
Yes.
don't, yeah, I don't see any pros like which is the best way. If one can, one has to ask which is the best way, like app make is the best way, and
No,
I'm
the
not
best
sure.
way is to use the dependency injection, because when you use dependency injection, which is on the invoke method, you're using the fruit class, because testing becomes a lot easier. Because so and even your regular when you work with different with your code, your instantiation happens automatically. So dependency injection is always the best choice to use. But
Mm,
I was just giving all the other three
mm.
options just in case if people want to also understand how you can do the instantiation of bindings.
Okay. Do you have any opinions? Like one of the question has been asked, which is the most used apart from the dependency injection, which is the default by Laravel. But
Okay.
if one has to write the code, which
hmm
is which is your preference?
Dependency injection is always the best, but uh, I prefer. dependency injection. That's something that I always use because writing tests or testing is quite easier, and
Mm.
it also takes. Uh, I would just stick to dependency
Mm.
injection.
So I wasn't aware of the resolve.
Okay,
Uh, yeah, and
resolve
in
is just an alias for app make.
okay, and so this dependency injection is not always available, especially when we are writing our own classes. This magic that it provides automatic injection is
Hmm.
provided only to the classes which Laravel maintains, like let's say job, some handle methods, uh, or probably some controllers, etc., etc. So this magic is applicable only at certain classes at Laravel level. But if we define our own classes, we are on our own, and that's when we are forced to use app make or resolve or app. So just wanted to know what is your preference.
Correct. I mean, when you usually, let's say you are, uh, you're developing apps. I mean, you break them into modules, and what you usually do is within each modules you have a service provider, and then you define these uh, instances. I mean, for a regular simple app, you might have you can just work with controllers, your models. But if you are building a little bit larger applications, you divide them into modules. You have for each module you create service providers, and within service providers you do bindings. So in those cases, when you have bindings, you would basically have you would be able to use the dependency injection. But for a simple app, instantiation is keep it simple. I wouldn't even go with bindings or anything. Just keep it as simple as possible.
All right, you can continue. Thanks.
Yep.
And
All right. So circling back to our first example on how Laravel authentication or the uh, Laravel's auth actually works, based on what we saw so far, is Laravel has this uses the singleton method using an alias called auth, and then which returns the auth manager. So within this auth manager is what you have the different methods called the attempt, or there are a lot of different methods that this auth manager has. So, so basically, what you do in your controller is instantiate the auth manager by by calling app make auth, which returns the auth manager, and then you call the attempt method. So this is what basically it does. All right. So that kind of concludes what is Laravel service containers, and how these work, and what are the different bindings. And there are any questions, let's go ahead and take a look at that.
so one, so,
Yep. All right.
mm, is there an echo?
No, I don't have an echo.
All right. So one question we have from Ashish is
Huh?
asking what are the potential downsides of overusing dependency injection?
Um, Overusing dependency injections. I mean, there are performance issues that you might have depending on how you set up your concrete classes. If you have uh, you know let's say you're calling within your concrete class an API, or you're calling a lot of DB operations that you're doing. Those are times where dependency injections, or even simple, if there is uh, something that you're doing within your concrete class, within the instantiation itself, there might be issues. But otherwise, there is, when it comes you it's I don't necessarily see any downsides as such. uh, you know uh, it You just have an instance within your container, that you're picking up from your service container, and you use it whenever you want it. It depends on how you, whether you set it as a singleton because the same object is going to be there in the container, or if it's going to be a new instance that you every time use it. So it depends on how you actually set it up. That's what matters most.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
Mm, no.
All right. Cool. All right. By the way, I just missed one part. I think I'm just gonna share the screen again. Sorry.
Yep.
So, am I still seeing my screen? So if you guys have any questions, or I'm reachable on Pinkery or LinkedIn or Twitter, and you guys can scan this, and I'm reachable on this goes to Pinkery, so I have all the links there. So if you guys want to reach out
Yeah.
to me, all right, cool. Thanks
Thanks.
a lot.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks, Abhishek, for doing this. Yeah,
I
it was
hope
great.
it's useful and it was
Yes,
easy to understand.
a lot, lot. I have one doubt.
Sure.
Mm, so, if the question is, I want you to just correct me if my understanding is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So these containers,
Mm-hmm.
can I imagine them as an array
Mm-hmm.
array of uh, associative array at global level of
Yeah.
application. So whenever we say, whenever we bind or do anything, all the things that you explain, it's basically maintaining an array at the highest level, and then it passes around in the application, like in the form of app container. That container app helper method basically exposes that class or the array at global level. So whatever we set at the service provider, it is accessible.
That's
Is my
exactly how it works. That's
okay?
exactly how it works. Correct.
All right, all right, all right. Thanks for clarifying. And one more confusion I have is between the scope binding and the regular binding.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned scope binding uh, uh, is valid only for one HTTP request, something like that, correct?
Correct.
So, but in general, PHP works like that, right? We hit a we hit okay, no, in the new like Franken PHP etc. things would be different. But
Yeah.
my
So
okay, but hmm,
let's take with the singleton, you have the authentication service. So irrespective of which how many requests you do, the authentication manager is always the same, giving you back the same data as to who is logged in or who is so that's across multiple requests. But when it comes to scoped, if you have a multi-tenant application, let's say uh, this request is coming from X
hmm,
domain, and this is what needs to be done for this domain, but this request is coming from this domain, and this is what needs to be done. So stuff like that is where scoped singletons help.
in more complex scenarios uh, where the domain request can come from different domains, etc. That okay, thanks.
Usually multi-tenant, if you look at the packages that provide you multi-tenancy, you would see
Hmm.
the use of scoped singletons being used.
Interesting. Thanks for pointer.
I hope it was useful and easy to understand.
Yes,
uh,
yes.
yeah. And it's kind of gives you tells you how important understanding internal larvals is. Dig through, open your application, dig through your application class, and then dig through how what it does, how the request lifecycle works. Makes life quite easy for you to understand, and makes you a good developer, and also makes it easy for you to help others when they come to you for doubts.
Hmm. All right. Thanks for the session.
No problem.
Yeah, nice having you. Thanks everyone who joined. I will see you next month. Yeah,
All right. Take
bye.
care.